Our society is going to become obsessed with pedophiles very soon. In the same way that we are kind of currently focused on the whole transgender issue, the way that the transgender topic is occupying the center of attention right now culturally, pedophiles will soon move in and take that place. That's what I see happening. I think you'll start to see more and more conversation about pedophilia as time goes on in the near future here. There's a lot of reasons for this. I've talked about it in previous videos. There's an ideological stack that's been building up for decades, and it is inevitably headed towards pedophilia. I think woke culture is bringing us there, but there's also other factors. There's also other reasons why this particular concept is going to become the center of attention. First of all, just from a woke perspective, so I'm going to address this from two different angles. This is a really hard subject to talk about. I think that, unfortunately, most people that I've run into, most people that I've talked to about this, don't want to talk about it. Nobody really wants to talk about this. Nobody really wants to think about it. And I think that overall, as a society, just from what I've seen in media, just from what I've seen from people talking about it, there seems to be a very immature perspective. It's not nuanced. It's not mature. So I'm just going to talk about it today. So the first thing is, the reason that I think the woke people are bringing us in this direction is because, really quickly they went from feminism to racism to homosexuality to transgenderism. That's the 4 layers, and then the 5th one's going to be pedophilia. Minor attracted persons, as they're already starting to label these people. But if you think about it, somebody who's transgender, their identity is valid, right? Whatever their experience is, it's valid. If they believe they're a woman, right? If, I don't want to retread that ground, but is the same argument not applicable to pedophiles? Is a pedophile not valid? If a 40-year-old is attracted to a 12-year-old, how can anybody standing outside of that person say whether that's a valid sexual feeling or not? And the same thing goes for a 12-year-old who's attracted to a 40-year-old. This is why I think the woke people are, this is where they're headed. Because if you think about it, what do they talk about all the time? And all their beliefs are based around social constructionism, right? Social constructs, labeling things social constructs, and then trying to... What is the age of consent if not a social construct? So it seems to me that it's kind of inevitable. It's inevitable that people on the extreme left, these social constructionist, postmodern, neo-Marxist, extreme lefty types, are going to start thinking about and talking about pedophiles a lot more. It's where they're headed. I don't know if they can see it, but I can see it. So the problem is that they have valid points. The problem is, like, as usual, with all these subjects, with the same thing with transgenderism and homosexuality and racism and feminism, it's all built on layers of truth. They know what they're talking about. They use real bits of data, like any good conspiracy theorist. They use real bits of data, real evidence, real truth to build their theories on. So, well, if a man attracted to other men is valid, if there's nothing wrong with that, if homophobia is bad, if heteronormativity is purely a social construct developed for, this is why this all ties together, right? What's heteronormativity if not a product of the patriarchy, And if a man attracted to other men is valid, why is a man attracted to children not valid? What's the difference between those two things? How come I can sit here and say homophobia is bad, but pedophobia, right? How is that not also bad, right? Why should society be judgmental or afraid of maps, right? This is what people are going to start talking about. You're going to start to see this. How come a 13-year-old doesn't have sexual autonomy, right? Why can a 13-year-old not make adult sexual decisions? They're going to start asking these questions. And the thing is that In the same way that the transgender thing threw off all of the regular people of society, right? Because nobody for in American history or in Western history or whatever ever had to defend what a woman is, right? Nobody ever had to define man or woman in any real sense, right? Like nobody was ever challenged on these fundamental concepts. And so when they started challenging people on like, define woman, what is a woman? A woman is like this social construct floating thing, right? There wasn't a good response ready. And so the same thing's going to happen with pedophilia, because they're going to start saying, they're going to start talking about these things like the age of consent. Like how are you going to be able to defend the age of consent from somebody who's on the extreme left? When they say 18 is a social construct, when they say that number is an arbitrary line created by the existing white supremacist patriarchal system, right? I mean, what were the laws created by other than the patriarchy and all this stuff? So it's like, how are we going to be able to defend this? And it's going to come down again to these extremely deep issues. Like, what does it mean? Like, why? I mean, you have to start asking these questions. What's the difference between somebody who's above or under the age of consent? Why do we have the age of consent? And there's some obvious reasons, like, you know, at an 8-year-old is not capable of, you know, even processing the information required to decide whether they want to have sex with a 40-year-old or not, right? Like, there's no... Let me attack that again. Let me say that from another angle. See, this is what trips me up about it, because there's nothing ethically wrong with an 18-year-old having sex with a 17-year-old, you know? Like, that's not a bad thing, but technically it's illegal, right? Technically, that's statutory rape, right? I mean, every state has different age lines, and there's different cultures with different ages, but, you know, we can look at different examples, like a 19-year-old having sex with a 16-year-old. Is that really wrong? What if they were in a relationship for a few years and one of them was like a junior in high school with a freshman or something, and then they kind of stayed together and then they had sex later on? Like, there's nothing... I have no problem with that. I see no problem with that. I don't think culturally people would have a problem with that. But technically, you're now breaking some laws here. And I think this is why we need to have a nuanced, like, we need to have a mature conversation, and we're not ready for it as a society. I just see it around me. I know that the regular people, the thinkers, the people in the media, just as a group, collectively, we're not ready to have a conversation about this stuff, because most people just... See, this is why it ties together with wokeness so well, because it turns into, like, most people just, the second something's associated with racism, they sort of just go, racism bad, that's evil, block off that whole section, right? So the same thing will happen with pedophilia. It'll be like anything that is associated with pedophilia will just be like, ooh, bad, right? Giant gray category, bad. All evil, all bad. But the thing is, to take this from an evolutionary stance, right? What is unethical about being sexually attracted to a sexually mature adult? And are there not sexually mature adults that are less than 18 years old, right? Like 18, just a number, you know? And there are fully sexually mature human beings that are less than 18 years old. And especially for women who sexually mature faster, I mean, there's 14 and 15-year-old girls that are fully sexually mature. And it's not sick or twisted or perverted for a heterosexual male to be attracted to a 15-year-old sexually. That's not twisted. That's not sick. Like, there's nothing... What society will do is call that disgusting, right? What an immature, unnuanced conversation will sound like will be, oh, this 20-year-old is attracted to this 15-year-old. That's somehow this twisted thing. When really, I mean, if you think about it, if we're just thinking about ancient societies or other societies or any other, I'm sure you can find plenty of examples of history plenty of examples in the historical record of cultures that were fully accepting of relationships between, any sexually mature adults, right? Regardless of the age. And so we have to have this conversation is, okay, where are these actual lines, right? Because it's not at 18. It's not. A 17-year-old can be completely sexually mature and completely responsible enough to have autonomy over their body, right? Like, I see no reason why a 17-year-old is incapable of that. And so what I'm trying to get at here is that there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of detail here that I think, if I could set this up properly, if I could do a real study on this, I would say, if I could really, really do this correctly, like if I wanted to study this scientifically, I would try to figure out where the natural line is. Like, what is because I think people have a natural, and when I say natural, I mean biological, right? Like, if you were to see a 50-year-old hitting on an 8-year-old, right? Like, that would make you uncomfortable, I think. If I was in a room and I saw a 50-year-old making sexual movements towards an 8-year-old, I would be very uncomfortable with that. So, and I don't think that that's a societal thing. I don't think that that's social. I think that that's biological. I think we have built into us these kind of social sensors that say, okay, that's not good, right? You don't want to support something like that because, first of all, first of all, an 8-year-old can't get pregnant, so it doesn't make any sense biologically. And second of all, from what I understand, that's going to basically ruin the emotional state, like the state of that 8-year-old for the rest of their life, right? Like, that person is going to... I know people that are victims of child sexual abuse have a tough time in life, so... And that seems like that's not a product of modern times. That's just, like, that's been a constant throughout all of history, right? If you were living in the year 50,000 BC and a 50-year-old sexually abused an 8-year-old, that 8-year-old is going to have a tough time in life. There's no society that makes that good, right? And so you have to figure out where the actual line is. And I think what you would need to do, really, if I could do it myself, if I could set up the study myself, I would say, what you need to do is get a huge sample size of people. You need to put them in a room where they are witnessing a social interaction between two people. And you need to judge their instinctual reaction to it somehow. And so you would put them in the room with like a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and you'd say, okay, how do you feel about these two having sex with each other, right? Or sexual behavior between the two of them. And I think most people would not be disturbed by that. They wouldn't be made uncomfortable by that. But then you would put them in the different social situations, and you would say, okay, here's a 25-year-old and a 15-year-old. And then it's like, all right, are you uncomfortable with this? Like, what's your reaction? And you just do that with 1,000 different permutations with thousands of different people. And then you find the actual line where we're uncomfortable. That's how I would do it. And I would bet a lot of money that it would be the line would be less than 18 for sure. Less than 18 for sure. My guess is that it would have a lot more to do with the sexual maturity of the bodies involved. If you see two sexually mature adult bodies having sex, that's fine. I don't know that this whole concept of... This is where it gets tricky again, right? Because it's like, what's the argument? I mean, the argument is kind of obvious, right? It's that people that are too young don't have the maturity to make decisions about consent. And so somebody who's older would be able to manipulate somebody who's younger into sex because the younger person is not mature enough to be responsible. But you have to say, okay, if that's true, does that line not change on a case-by-case basis? Can't you have a 15-year-old who's more emotionally mature than an 18-year-old, and vice versa? You could have somebody who's 20 who really has the sexual emotional maturity of a 14-year-old. So we have this line at 18, which I think is higher than necessary, but it's like a guardrail because you'd rather err on the side of being too restrictive than not restrictive enough, right? So I think that I'm not saying 18 is a bad line. I really don't have any problems with it currently, but my main problem is that the rule for 18 is built on logic that will not hold up to the attack that will soon come from the woke, because they are going to come at it with their usual tools. And as we've seen over the past few decades here, they are capable of making powerful arguments to convince a lot of people. So they are going to make these arguments, and they're going to start convincing people more and more. It's going to start happening. As long as these woke people retain power the way that they have. I mean, it's also possible that the whole woke movement loses steam and it kind of fizzles out, and then we don't have to worry about it. But that's not what I see happening. I see them gaining power. And I see them inevitably headed towards minor attracted persons. You're already seeing little examples of it. You're already seeing it. If you pay attention, you can see it around. There are people questioning the age of consent. There are people starting to examine the sexual validity of pedophilia. Because if you think about it, if a 50-year-old is attracted to a 12-year-old, who's to say that their experience isn't valid, right? Who's to say that that's not I mean, if there's nothing, this is why it comes back to, it's why all the layers interact with each other in a very interesting way, right? If heteronormativity and homophobia are just social constructs, then, you know, everything that we believe about pedophiles and pedophilia are equally socially constructed. So that's why I think you have to stop taking these stupid social constructionist stances and come at it from an evolutionary angle here and say there must be an evolutionary explanation for why we are made uncomfortable by pedophilia, right? Because I think it is undeniable that you would be uncomfortable in a room with, you know, a very large age gap between two sexual partners, especially if one of them is very young. It's funny how we have problems with people, you know, we have these problems when there's like a 70-year-old and like a 30-year-old, right? But we don't call that pedophilia, but we're still made kind of uncomfortable by it in some way or another. Pedophilia is to defend children, and then you have to get into, you know, just to kind of continue down this line of thinking here, is that there really are important distinctions to make between people who are pedophiles and people who are ephebophiles, which is like, I don't remember what the line is, but if you're attracted to like 13 to 18, that means something. And then if you're attracted to like 13 or younger, that's like a whole nother thing. And I think that everybody can agree that the people who are attracted to children that are younger than 13 and then act on it are worse than the people who are attracted to at least sexually mature bodies and then act on it, right? Like if there's somebody hitting on a 15-year-old, if you have a 30-year-old, right? 30-year-old dude, and you know, it's funny, most pedophiles are men. I think that people need to realize that there are biological differences between men and women, and for whatever reason, pedophilia seems to be in the realm of the males. I don't know why, but 99 out of 100 times that I've seen anything to do with a pedophile, it's a guy. I mean, I'm not saying women aren't capable of sexual perversion, but as usual, it seems like men are far more likely. But anyway, if you see a 30-year-old hitting on a 15-year-old, you're going to have a different reaction than if you see a 30-year-old hitting on a 5-year-old, right? Like, there's going to be a much stronger negative reaction to the second case there, right? And so the problem is that the word pedophile, I think, in the mainstream parlance, sort of just refers to anybody who's attracted to anybody that's less than 18. And it kind of brings up that meme of that, I don't know, from some TV show where it's like this police officer interrogating a suspect about this, and he goes, "She was 17 years old, 364 days and 23 hours, you disgusting pervert," right? And it's funny how that's kind of how society currently treats it. It's like, you can like, there really is no difference between having sex with a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old. There's no difference there, right? There's no meaningful distinction between a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old. And yet, legally speaking, there's the biggest distinction on the planet, right? If you have sex with a 17-year-old, you're labeled as a pedophile, you go to jail, you get beaten up in jail because everybody's like, oh, you fuck kids, right? If you have sex with an 18-year-old, perfectly legal. And, you know, people don't seem to have as much of a problem with it, although there would still be some sort of social consequence, right? If you're a 50-year-old having sex with an 18-year-old, even if there's no legal ramifications, there's going to be social consequences. It's just, it's, to me, part of the reason I'm talking about this is that I've actually tried to shoot a video about this a few times now in the past week or so. And I keep getting caught up on I keep getting stuck on different issues, which is why today I wanted to make this more of a cover all the bases episode. And I'll probably talk about this more in the future because I think there's a lot of interesting places to go with this particular subject that people are usually uncomfortable going. And, well, that's my superpower, if anything, is just talking about things that most other people aren't comfortable talking about. So, I've been watching this YouTube channel that I just discovered. I'll put a link in the description. It's called DAP, D-A-P, Dads Against Predators. And it's an amazing YouTube channel. It's worth binging, which is what I did. They have like 150 episodes up. I've watched maybe 30 to 50 of them now. Skimmed through them, you know. But what they do, there are a couple of dads, a couple guys in the US who will create accounts on social media platforms, usually dating apps or other chat rooms or something, and they pose as young children, and like 12 or 13-year-old children, and they start chatting with guys, and what they do in all these text conversations. So what these videos, the way this YouTube channel is set up, in the beginning of the video they'll show you a text conversation between them posing as young kids and these guys. And it's always the same thing. They say, "Hey, what's up? I'm 13. Do you care?" And then the guy in the conversation keeps talking, right? And so what these guys are doing is they're trapping pedophiles, right? They're trapping sexual predators. And so they will get some 40-year-old guy in a conversation who's thinking that he's talking to a 13-year-old girl, tries to meet up with her at Walmart or something. This guy goes to Walmart and then he meets up with these dads who show up with a bunch of dudes and a bunch of cameras. And they're not police officers. They don't arrest these people, but they shame them publicly. They do a whole humiliation process. They record everything. They shout at them. They draw attention to them. And they basically just grill them, these guys. And then they report their information to the police and they get their license plate numbers and everything. But it's a channel that's really worth checking out. It's a very satisfying moment, kind of, really, to see these guys caught doing something that they themselves know is wrong, which is, again, what makes this such an interesting conversation subject, in my opinion. Which makes this so interesting is that these guys know, pedophiles know, that what they're doing is wrong when they act on it, right? So there's another important distinction that people aren't ready to deal with, which is the fact that a pedophile can exist you can be, how do you put this? You can be a moral pedophile, right? If you don't act on it. Because you can't change it, right? These men don't choose to be pedophiles. Nobody chooses that. But they are. They're attracted to kids. And some of them act on it. And that's where the evil happens. But the attraction itself, people need to understand, the attraction itself happens to a person, right? You're on the roller coaster ride. You don't get to choose what makes your dick hard. That is chosen for you by something inside of you that you have no control over. So this is, again, comes back to this woke thing, right? Gay people didn't choose to be gay, right? The feeling of homosexual attraction is not something that you decided. It's something that's put up upon you. And so the same thing happens with pedophiles, right? And so what's interesting about this particular YouTube channel, if you watch their videos, when they catch these guys, they don't beat them up, they don't like attack them or anything, but they do start to ask honest questions. They start to say, why are you the way you are? Why are you doing this? How do you explain this, right? And none of them have good answers, but at least in one or two of the videos, they actually do like in one of the videos, they caught this guy trying to meet up with like a 12-year-old girl at a gas station, right? And they followed him back to his house and they got him to sit down. And they started talking about it, and the guy was sexually abused as a kid, and he couldn't say the word pedophile, interestingly enough. Like, he had a stutter that only applied to the word pedophile. He kept trying to say it, and he couldn't say it, and it must have something to do with, like, repressed... I don't know, it's you should watch these videos, but, what I'm getting at here is that what was I getting? I was trying. Pedophiles are always going to exist. That's the thing. Is that every generation produces new pedophiles. There's always a new generation of them. And it's a conversation that society is going to have no matter what, really. I mean, because they're always going to exist, and there really is evil involved here, right? Because sexually interacting with a child is going to ruin that child's life, it seems, right? It seems like there's really no way for a 50-year-old to have some sort of sexual encounter with a kid that does not ruin the life of the kid. So that means that their feelings lead them to behave in evil ways, right? And so that's something that societies, I mean, on a certain level, we are dealing with it. We've always dealt with it because they've always existed, but it's... Well, we're going to see what happens. When the woke people start talking about it, we're going to see where the chips come down, because I think the transgender thing has woken people up to the absurdity of some of these social constructionist ideas, but it hasn't woken everybody up. So the fifth layer here, once we get to pedophiles, I think that will really start to wake people up to the idea that maybe this ideological stack that's been building up for a very long time isn't such a good thing if it's going to lead us in the direction of encouraging adults to have sex with kids, because I think that that's pretty much where it's headed. And I think, you know, there's a reason why, if you want to get real deep into some of the conspiracy theory stuff, you know, it used to be the fact that decades ago they would trap famous people into blackmail situations by recording them having gay sex, right? You could get a president or some senator or like whatever, some person in a position, a powerful position, you can... Oh, is my phone gonna die? Shoot, I'm at 5%. I'll wrap it up. So, they used to trap people with blackmail by, you know, having pictures or videos of them doing gay stuff, right? But now that doesn't work so much anymore. So, it seems like with Epstein and the whole new... I mean, I don't know how all that works or worked, but, you know, it, rather than having pictures of somebody having gay sex, you have pictures of them having sex with a minor, and then you really got them. And so I think that there's some reason why this is in our future. You know, we're just kind of headed in this direction, culturally speaking, maybe even without the woke influence. But it's going to be a conversation subject that is going to happen more and more, and so I just wanted to talk about it today. Today is the 6th of February, 2022. Happy Sunday. I'm out. Bye.